Hi everyone, I'm Rachita. I'm a second year undergraduate studying history and politics at St. Edmund Hall, and I will be the chair for today's Vice President Welfare and Equal Opportunities Hust. So the role represents student members to the university and external audiences. They lead in a policy-making, campaigning, and lobbying work in conjunction with other officers or student welfare and equal opportunity issues at the University of Oxford. They provide support to key students and welfare providers, including common rooms representatives. They are a sabbatical trustee and play a key role in the relationship between student council and the trustee board. And today we have our candidates. I'll just go through them one by one. We have Ashley, Ellie, Keisha, Sophie, and Lucy. A bit about the format of the hustings. We will first hear a 2-minute speech from each of the candidates on their proposal and stances, and then we'll move on to some of the questions. The first two are general questions, which all the candidates will be given a minute to answer. And then candidates will have 2 questions specific to the contents of their manifesto, which they will have 1 minute to answer. As always, please ensure that you stick to the time limits given for your speeches and the questions. If you continue speaking after the allotted time, I will have to mute you and move on to the next candidate. Please also do not speak over or interrupt other candidates when it's their turn to speak, and also ensure that you're on mute when it's not your turn to speak. Thank you. So I think I'll now hand over to the candidates and I'll give them an opportunity to get started on their speeches. We'll be going in alphabetical order. So Ashley, if you'd like to go.
Hi, I am Ashley. I just introduced myself to you guys, but I'll do it again. I'm Ashley, and I'm an MSc student in sociology at St. Anthony's College. So I have only been at Oxford for a few months, but part of the reason I'm running for this position is for that exact reason. I have had a lot of experiences over the last couple of months, which have, of course, been shaped a lot by being here in a pandemic, but also have been shaped by being a postgraduate student and an international student here at Oxford. Also, when I was an undergraduate student, I did research on diversity, equity, inclusion in elite institutions like Oxford. So I've got a lot of experience learning about these kinds of things and having conversations about equal opportunities and welfare, and learning about the ways that institutions actively support students and also virtue signal supporting students. And so that's really where my passion for this drives from, is this whole idea of this intersection that exists between welfare and equal opportunities. For me, you cannot separate the two things in many cases. They go hand in hand, and if you have a diverse student body like Oxford is gradually growing more and more diverse over time, you have to also be implementing policies for students that equate to giving them more support and actually like making them feel at home in their university. So I've got a lot of points on my manifesto in relation to these, so I'll not get through them all. But some of the main points start as early as access, admissions. One of my points is demystifying the admissions process. When I did research, we learned about we talked about DEI and the way that institutions signal online to basically like tell students that they are, care about access and supporting students. But in many ways, these things are not substantively held throughout when you actually become a student. And it's something that I've experienced as a graduate student myself. So I've got a great background knowledge on these kinds of things in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And that's why you should vote for me.
Thank you, Lucy. Ellie, if you'd like to go.
So hi, my name's Ellie, my pronouns are she, her, and I'd love to be your VP for Welfare and Equal Opportunities Oxford SU. We have a duty to make sure every student of every race, gender, sexuality, background, and disability not only feels supported, but able to thrive here and feel at home, and I can make that happen. As JCL Welfare Executive, I experienced firsthand how to support students through welfare crises and how to lobby often stubborn college authorities to change things. I'm part of the Disabilities Campaign. I've worked with It Happens Here and been endorsed by them, and I've recently brought back the SU Women's Campaign. I've also helped lobby to end the eating disorder crisis and started Oxford's first mental health magazine. 12% of students seek help via the counselling service every academic year, and student mental health is in crisis, so a crisis response is what we need. We need more funding, more sessions, and targeted support like eating disorder counselling and grief counselling. We must hire more Black counsellors and counsellors from minority ethnic groups, LGBTQ counsellors and disabled counsellors, and change the pre-intake form so students can request a counsellor who shares their lived experience. We must make sure that anti-racism and implicit bias workshops are mandatory for all colleges, and that this education is not just treated as a one-off during freshers, but is continued throughout the year with further workshops and decolonisation of the curriculum. And we must treat discrimination and harassment with the severity it warrants, ensuring that all colleges adhere to the university harassment policy to the letter, as they're currently not mandated to. I will also lobby for an overhaul of suspension policy to replace the archaic and damaging suspension rules often in place now, and for a fund to be created for private accommodation grants for suspended students, especially for grads and for exchange students. I'm a disabled student, and I would create an accessibility gold standard guide for colleges to follow so they can become accessible to all. And finally, I really want to bring back some of the sense of community that's been lost due to COVID. I want to hold monthly forums for people to bring up issues with me or just like come and say hello. And I want to foster a sense of community amongst JCR and MCR welfare reps. I've been in that role myself, and I know how crucial a support network feels. Lobbying, advocacy, and welfare are my passions, and that's why I've taken every advantage possible to procrastinate.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. Keisha, if you would like to go.
Yeah, so, sorry. Hi, my name is Keisha, sorry. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm a third year student studying Chinese and Korean studies at Wadham College. And yeah, I want to be your welfare, I would love to be actually your welfare, your VP for welfare and equal opportunities. So, okay, for a long time, it has been the case that the uni has not been there for us, in terms of supporting all students, be it undergrad, postgrad, be it with regarding issues to do with discrimination, race, in terms of race, sexuality, disability, and so on. I think this has been a long-standing issue that has been massively exacerbated by the coronavirus. The majority of us have all been negatively impacted by the lack of support to varying degrees and to different extents. And I think it's time this stopped. Of course, I mentioned being impacted by the lack of support in regards to discrimination, but there's also a lack of support in terms of, for example, socializing with people from other colleges, getting outside of that immediate college environment that can be toxic for some or can feel suffocating for some. Also in terms of academics, lots of people struggle to write essays. I'm in third year and I learned how to write essays this year. And even then, I'm not even sure if I've got it down. So it's there are just so many fields in which we need support. Yeah, and again, I think it's time this lack of support stopped. We should be feel supported by the university structure. It's time that we as students, actually feel supported by the university and not feel like it's against us or we're struggling or fighting the university to gain the support that should already be there. This is ridiculous. So my policies are aimed at increasing this energy of support, this feeling of support. Of course, a lot needs to change, but I focused on 4 key areas in order to ensure that I can deliver on my policies and promises, because there actually needs to be real change. And I don't I feel like focusing on 4 key areas will mean that I can actually.
Thank you, Keisha.
Yeah.
Lucy, you're up next. Would you like to go now?
Hi everyone, my name is Lucy. My official name is Shen Qing. I'm studying education masters in St. Stephen House. Our university is made by 45% of international students, and of them, 64% of them is graduate students. That's why I want, as an international, also postgraduate student, I want to reintroduce a student union that take care of your emotional health, well-being, and inclusions, and help you through your post-COVID-19 learning path. There's 3 main points of my manifesto. One is educational equal succeed. As a member of Oxford Chinese Student and Scholar Association this year, I met lots of students like myself have faced the financial barriers and during the university experience. So I wish to give it a particular considerations when providing accessible and targeted information for international and hardship students. I also wish to run a campaign, campus food bank, to help students who need the welfare support especially during this COVID outbreak. My second point is the well-being and community. Maintaining a sense of the community through this global crisis can be very difficult. So I wish to work on the well-being hubs for each student host residential, and develop an online well-being booking system for making appointment much easier than what we have right now. The final point is I wish to valuing your experts to become a reverse mentoring with the key student welfare providers. I can know what's happening in every college and university residential halls, and develop a staff and student minority panel to approve the inclusive for all the students. And I also wish to work closely with the enterprise.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank
That's
you.
Great. Sophie, would you like to go next?
Okay, hi, my name's Sophie. I'm a fourth year undergrad at Teddy Hall. I've also been in Oxford since 2015. I've suspended my studies twice and I've done a year abroad. So you might be thinking, why on earth would I want to stick around in Oxford for another year? Well, simply put, I think that's because in terms of welfare, we deserve better than what we've got. As your VP for Welfare and Equal Opportunities, I want to know what you want so I can make the university take notice and step up to the plate. Student Drive, an initiative at Oxford, is incredible, but in these important matters, the university has to recognise their responsibility to step up and help us fulfil our potential, regardless of background or circumstance. The welfare experience at Oxford is, sadly, at the moment, far from accessible. LGBTQ+ students, for example, especially trans students, have very little specialised support from centralised services. BAME students also face unique issues at Oxford, which they may not feel able to raise with anyone in their colleges. The same goes for disabled students, first-gen students, students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, student parents, estranged students, suspended students, care experience students, international students. Sadly, I could go on. Personally, I didn't even know that my long-term condition was a disability under the Equality Act until my second year at Oxford. I missed out on almost 2 years of support to help me complete my degree. That's what motivated me to become the first disabilities officer at Teddy Hall in a number of years, where I've used my personal experience to help others, which I love. However, my personal experience is all I've been using. There's a real need for our wonderful common room reps to have centralised support, which I would provide through meetings and a portfolio of access templates for them. We need to ensure that specialised support is available for everyone through college welfare teams, centralised services, SU campaigns, community organisations, the NHS, or a wonderful combination of all of the above. Then undergraduate and graduate freshers need more information on these services before they arrive, and existing students shouldn't have to go hunting for that information when they need it. We need that diversity in the counselling service, and we need a commitment from the university that they will do the absolute maximum to ensure accessibility beyond admission. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. The university has shown that it wants to help. The new mental health task force has promised extra funding to centralised services, and the uni has pledged to work with the NHS to provide.
Thank you, Lucy. That's great.
Thank you.
We'll now be moving on to some general questions, and each of you will have a minute to answer these. Again, we'll be going in alphabetical order as you answer these. The first question is that sabbatical officers must maintain positive relationships with college and university staff who can help achieve their aims. How will you foster a constructive relationship with academics and staff whose views you might disagree with? Ashley, would you like to go first?
Yes, absolutely. So I guess the way that you foster relationships with staff or peers or students or anyone that you disagree with, it's all just based around respecting other people's differences of opinions. This is what, like, having conversations about equality, diversity, equity, access, these kinds of things are hard conversations to have. Welfare as well. I'm a rep for my program for the MSc in sociology, and I've created petitions that lots of students didn't agree with. And it's just a matter of ensuring that everyone feels heard in a conversation. And that's what welfare is all about, is making sure that you always hold respect for people regardless of whether or not they agree with your viewpoint on a particular issue. And so that's what it means to be a representative in any sense, whether that means for the OUSU or for a program or for a college. It's just a matter of listening and making everyone feel heard, and making sure that you actually take people's considerations and their comments when you go and move forward to, if you're talking to your department, for example, something like that.
Thank you, Ashley. Ellie, would you like to go next?
So yeah, I have quite a bit of experience with this sort of thing. As JCR Welfare Rep, we were lobbying college to change quite a few things in regards to the dean system and suspension. And a lot of the time, like we'd been told by the reps before us, like, oh, this never really changes because college aren't willing to listen. And I think a lot of the time, it's not just about getting your voice heard, but it's about making your voice representative of everyone's. Like that's what being a representative is, right? And it's sort of about, you know, gaining that sort of bank of evidence to show people that actually there is a really big appetite for things to change. And it's not just about, you know, one annoying rep sending a bunch of emails. It's about a collective voice. And I'd really want to be a representative for that collective voice. Again, obviously with sort of like firm but respectful tones in terms of, you know, that's kind of what lobbying is all about. It's not sort of about asking nicely and then being fine when things don't go your way, but it is about being respectful and making sure everyone feels like they can access, you know, the highest forms of support and everyone's voice can be heard in terms of these conversations.
Thank you, Ellie. Keisha, would you go next?
Right, yeah. So I have experience doing it. So I was a part of the race working group in Wadham's first ever race working group following incidents with George Floyd in the summer. And I completely agree with what Ellie and Ashley have said, like mash it together. So I think respect is like absolute, like respect needs to be there for both parties. Again, people have different opinions to you, like this needs to be accepted. And the only way to make a change is to understand, I don't know, like I guess what the base of where that opinion is coming from. And that can only happen through having enough respect to have dialogue with that person and communicate with like these academics, members of staff, etc. Again, I agree, you need to show there is an appetite. You need to communicate with like the majority of people who are concerned with like whatever issue is in question. And I think research as well is super important. Like you need to have your facts and like your information ready to like counter anything, like or like just have that in order to like have.
Thank you, Keisha.
Yeah, get your point across. Yeah. Sorry.
Lucy, would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi. I think the first thing, most important, is to create a welcoming environment for the open communication and everything. Like as Keisha mentioned, we can always talk through it, and especially for these roles, we will meet people from different diversity backgrounds and to respect their cultural expectations. Secondly, I think is to get into the root of the problems, because in the end of the day, we all want to get this solved and to have the best and most effective way to solve these problems. So sometimes when we argue with the people who don't agree with me, because someone's needs are probably not being met, so we need to bring down to what the root of the problem is. That's one point I mentioned on my manifesto, because I want to bring up the reverse mentoring, which are those people's college representatives' voice can be heard. So I'm not sitting in the high place. Thank you.
Sophie, would you like to go next?
Yeah, brilliant answers from everyone. I think there are two key parts to this answer for me, and the first one is communication. Well, the first one is information, actually. Sorry, I got them the wrong way around. The first one is information, and the second one is how you communicate that information. So as Keisha mentioned, it's so important to do your research before you go into any sort of meeting. So that could mean surveying the student body, that can mean holding drop-in sessions, or trying to get a feel for how people are feeling, using the JCRs and the MCRs to get a real idea of what students want. Then you need to do your research on the committees. So say if you're going to, you want more funding for the counselling service, you need to find out what's the budget, how much funding is available, where does the funding come from? All of these facts, which may not be available to you immediately, but I don't think I would let that stop me. I would have the most comprehensive information available. And then, as everyone said, communication, respectful two-way dialogue. I think expecting mutual respect isn't a huge ask in these situations, but you also have to be wary that we are asking for things and right. We are attempting to
Thank you, Sophie.
Thanks.
Okay, we have our next question, which is, what would you do for students who arrive at Oxford with pre-existing mental health conditions and who are not classed eligible for short-term support from the University Counselling Service? Ashley, would you like to go first?
Yes, absolutely. So for students that are already coming to Oxford with pre-existing mental health conditions, I think that the first thing is being more clear in terms of what students can access and what these things mean, especially for international students who aren't accustomed to like the NHS or these kinds of things. Is something that I experienced myself coming here. I had to ask my GCR president, hey, I don't understand how mental health works here, completely different system than the United States. So the first thing would be accessibility of information. I think that in many cases, that's like where a lot of like lack of clarity comes for students that are coming in from outside of the UK, outside of Oxford, outside of this particular system, because there's so many different levels and a lot of decentralization in terms of mental health support, counseling, these kinds of things. So I think that my focus would be in terms of making that more clear for people right off the bat, and making the information just more available. And making sure that of course GCRs, JCRs, these things are supporting students as well.
Thank you, Ashley. Ellie, you're up next.
So I think this is one of the biggest issues facing welfare at the moment, because in Oxfordshire, waiting lists for like mental health problems, especially eating disorders, can be 1 to 2 years. And if people have 6 sessions at the counselling service and then are sort of left hanging, that's obviously really, really bad, especially for people with really severe mental health problems. And I think like a lot of colleges I know have private counselling funds, and I think that can be really, really helpful because often treatment is really inaccessible if people can't afford private counselling. And I think I'd really push for all colleges to have something in place like that, so that students who need regular counselling and aren't supported by NHS waiting lists can access that. I also think I would just push for more counselling service funding. I think 6 sessions as a maximum is, not really enough for a lot of people. And with more funding, we could be offering more sessions. I don't think that's an unreasonable ask. And that's something I really stress in my manifesto. I think is very, very important. So yeah.
Thanks, Ellie. Keisha, you're up next.
Right. Yeah. So I was gonna say, like, in Freshers Week, I feel like because you spoke about people having pre-existing mental health issues, and it's like it is the case sometimes that we don't even realize ourselves that like we might have like any form of like issue or anything, maybe not issue is the wrong word, anything that we need to possibly handle or deal with. So I think in Freshers Week there should be some form of like guide, like maybe like guide, I don't know, like mental health guide, or like just like identifying various like patterns, because depression can be very common and we may not even realize we have it due to many reasons. So I feel like a PowerPoint, maybe something like that, should be incorporated in Freshers Week to make sure that the issue is identified or before term starts. Also, I think there are mentors. So there's the counselling service, but the counselling service also has like mentors who are different to counsellors who you can meet on a weekly basis, and there's more funding for that. So I think I would really push for colleges to advertise. I only heard about this year. I think it needs to be advertised better, particularly in Freshers Week during this PowerPoint maybe, and within this pamphlet people can be given if it becomes compulsory.
Thank you, Keisha. Yeah. Lucy?
Hi, my answer is, firstly, I think we do need wellbeing hubs for each student who's residential, because it could take a very long time to book online. So it might be easier to just get straight on your residential hubs to get the straight help. Sometimes it could be a small issue, so they need to be sorted immediately. So, secondly, myself, I have been used the online wellbeing bookings through the email, and it takes a really long time to get through. So I think in terms of the technology that we all use in 21st centuries, online wellbeing booking system need to be done in the Oxford Union's pages. Thirdly, as an international student, I find it's really hard to follow information to go with the GP registration, police registration. It's too difficult to read, especially English, not my first language. So I think it needs to be a multiple language translations for each student from different backgrounds, so they can find.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Sophie, you're up next.
Yeah, sure. So I instantly related to this question because this is what happened to me. So I had a pre-existing mental health condition, and I didn't know that that is classed as a disability, which means as a UK student, I was eligible for the Disabled Students Allowance, which means, as Keisha mentioned, I was eligible for mentoring. So that is a long-term thing, and that is something that is an incredibly underused resource. And I think it's something, there are issues within the Disability Advisory Service itself, but that is where I would at first direct a student if they had a long-term mental health issue. Now, if you were an international student, as we've mentioned, the difficulties can be greater if you're not eligible for disabled students allowance. So in that case, that's when I would push for support from SU campaigns like Discam, who do the most amazing work, and also community organisations. Oxfordshire Mind have a really incredible kind of variety of courses that you can do for varying mental health conditions. And as Keisha said, I think information, particularly in Freshers Week and before freshers arrive in Oxford, undergrad and grad, is so important. So what I would do is create those guides. Yeah.
Okay, now we have a couple of questions that are specific to things that you've written in your manifesto. So first up, Ashley, the lack of BAME and in particular Black staff and faculty members in Oxford has been a long-standing issue that students have begun lobbying to change. And this is something that you've mentioned in your manifesto as well. What do you believe is the best way to engage with the university in a compelling manner that will facilitate greater cooperation with these demands?
So in terms of engagement with the university as a whole, I think that a tendency in these conversations surrounding DEI and access, and specifically race and ethnicity, people try to tiptoe around what the actual issues are. And I think that that's not what needs to be done. For example, this letter from the students to Oxford, the open letter that was written, that was, in my opinion, like a really, really strong way to make demands from a university and to push the university to do something that will actually change substantively. You see a lot that, like, with universities in terms of changing institutionally, it takes cultural and societal pressure to make this happen. So one way to do that is by making sure that other people outside of the university and students are having larger conversations, which will push the university to make changes in relation to whatever the issue is in this case, specifically BAME students, BAME staff, faculty, counselors, all of these things, all of these groups being vastly underrepresented. Okay.
Thank you. Ellie, in your manifesto, you speak of an accessibility gold standard. Could you elaborate on what this would entail and what you would hope to achieve from this?
Okay, sure. So I think one of the biggest issues in terms of accessibility at the moment is that every college varies wildly in terms of the built environment and how accessible that is, and also how accessible sort of different procedures, like their suspension procedures, their allowances for part-time study, their practices around exams, like that all can differ wildly. That's one of, you know, the natural features and flaws of the college system. And what the gold standard would essentially be like, I would do lots and lots of research and work with the Oxford Accessibility Project about like what a perfectly accessible college would look like in terms of buildings and procedures and content creation. And I'd sort of compile that into a guide tailored to each college to show them what they should be doing in the short-term future to make them as accessible as possible, because it's not good enough that a disabled student can receive, you know, a less, you know, a worse experience at one college than they would at another. And I really want to change that.
Thank you. Keisha, you importantly emphasize the need for a system through which one can choose a counselor you feel most comfortable with. This is particularly important in the case of Black and ethnic minority students who are often made to deal with the lack of diversity in counseling staff. What steps would you take to ensure that these students feel comfortable accessing these services?
Students feel comfortable accessing these services. I think, wait, what exactly do you mean by comfortable? Or is that just down to interpretation? Am I allowed to ask that?
Yeah, I guess it's that they feel confident enough to even approach the system in the first place.
Okay, yeah. So I think so I'm ACS welfare officer, and recently, because last summer Oxford just got its free 2 Black counsellors and a POC counsellor, which is amazing. We're really happy with that. But anyway, as ACS welfare officer, we last week hosted an event in which we had these the Black counsellors and the POC counsellor attend the event, and they actually have a new race working it's POC counselling group, sorry. And they spoke about it very openly, and it was a session in which anyone could attend and freely ask them questions, and we all just felt super comfortable talking to them at the end. Like, they were very much like, we're just people, like, you guys come to us. So I think that I would have those sessions where you can meet the counsellors before and taste confidence in them.
Thank you. Lucy, In your manifesto, you state that you will work to provide accessible and targeted information to international and hardship students. What practical steps will you take to ensure that these are achieved?
I think it's first of all, all of us will get a handbook before we become freshers into the university. But I think it depends on what background you're from. You will need to different process of the other things apart from academic preparations, like GP's registration and police registration that I mentioned. So I think the accessible and targeted information I'm particularly mentioning is some language translated already information to providing on your handbook according to what backgrounds or what cultures you're from. Secondly, I think as an international student, I haven't heard much about scholarships opportunity for myself. So it could be more information about how could you apply for a scholarship apart from being an EU or UK student. Firstly, we paid tuition fee as one goal. So I assume that lots of people may have the difficulty.
Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Okay. Sophie, you emphasize in your manifesto the importance of providing support for students with drug and alcohol addictions with no shame or fear. How will you implement this and ensure that students who are affected can feel confident enough to access the support they need?
So for me, this is a policy that's incredibly close to my heart, and it comes down to two things. The first thing is working with the colleges to make sure that there is a no prejudice policy when it comes to any student who is dealing with a drug or alcohol problem, and they should not have any fear of being disciplined because they are acknowledging that they have an issue, and that is one of the bravest things that you can do, and it is one of the most difficult things you can do. So first of all, I would want assurance from all colleges that that's going to happen. I would lobby to make that the case. The next thing I would do, again, it comes down to that diversity in the counselling service. So working with the NHS and Turning Point and other local services in Oxfordshire and organisations like Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous to provide specialist support for students and to work with them to have the professionals create workshops or counselling session, making sure there are counsellors who are trained in addiction who students can go to, and again making sure that they can meet those counsellors and actually have a choice.
Yeah. Okay, back to you, Ashley. Quite a few of the actions that you intend to take in your manifesto involve lobbying universities and colleges for change. What do you think effective lobbying looks like, and how would you work to implement this?
Okay, so effective lobbying for me is, well, we as a rep in the OUSU, you get to sit on a number of committees. The first thing is listening, of course, to the conversations that are being had. I'm obviously not in the OUSU right now, so I don't know how these conversations usually go. But from my personal experience, lobbying that I've done is surrounding mostly petitions and larger conversations with people in my department or in my college, because I'm a rep for both. And so in terms of actually creating change, what I would do to lobby would be to do these kinds of things, like create petitions where you provide evidence in terms of this is what exists, this is what needs to change. These kinds of things is what people generally are more apt to listen to, and especially when it comes down to university and institutionalizing new policies and changes that students care about. It's really like a mixed methods approach, whether that means speaking with students and having, feedback from them and having research that you've done, like quantitative research as well. So I would take sort of a stronger stance of petitioning and a mixed methods approach.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Ellie, you touch upon important issues of transparency and increasing the transparency of the Oxford Hardship Fund and the university harassment procedure. What steps would you take to achieve transparency in these matters?
I think a lot of it comes down to just communication and publication, because when I was researching sort of my manifesto for this role, I wasn't actually aware that those two things that you mentioned really existed in a concrete form. I had to sort of go deep into the university websites to even find them. And this is especially important when we think about, stuff like the hardship fund. Students who are struggling financially don't want to have to trawl through pages and pages of the website to find the information they need. And it's the same with students who might want to report an incident of racist harassment. That information should be freely available to all students. And I think just stuff that's as easy as posters being put up in every JCR and common room, or stuff being readily available online that is more relevant now, and sort of more simple in a more simple sort of graphic form, perhaps. Like, it's just about communication and people knowing where that information is and having it presented simply. And I think that would make people feel a lot more clued up about where they can get support and where they can report things. And that's something I'd really push for.
Yeah. Thank you, Ellie. Keisha, you mentioned that you would lobby university for next year's finalists to be given mitigating circumstances. Considering the removal of the blanket safety net system for finalists this year, how would you approach the university with this issue?
Oh, that's a good question. So I think the main issue with the university's approach to exams, like for this year, for example, is not acknowledging the extent to which we've all massively been affected by the coronavirus and the extent to which online teaching has impacted us. And I think, of course, it's very unfortunate for this year's finalists, who are like many of my friends. But like, I think if using their experiences, I want to like do like a survey with them, basically, and for them to talk about their experiences and the impact not being given a safety net had on them, and then use that as leverage as to why next year's finalists should be given mitigating circumstances, because people have stories to share. Like, I think I think there'll be collective support for it, and with the evidence of this year's exams and evidence of the year before, I know quite a few people who've already graduated and who massively benefited from being given those mitigating circumstances. I feel like having that will act as great evidence for lobbying the university.
Yeah. Lucy, you suggest working closely with the with Enterprising Oxford that supports entrepreneurship for students and staff from various backgrounds. Why have you chosen to push for these proposals specifically?
Yeah, I worked as a researcher for the Entrepreneurs Oxford, and they have lots of initiative for equal opportunity, and especially for women entrepreneurs, if they want to go to or start a business in the end of the day. So I think it's a great opportunity, and lots of people don't know it yet. The Entrepreneur Oxford is actually providing lots of events and lots of like meetings for women and people from diverse backgrounds. If you want to start a business, especially like all of us in our final year or the end of the year being a master's student, we all have the anxiety of what I gonna do after graduations. So you can get all these skills and support from those people, but you also can rise up to your own business and your own initiative if you are in terms of being help or become a women allies in the end of the day. So I think it's a good approach for linking your student life into your undergraduate life and become your career life. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophie, in your manifesto, you promised to hold colleges account in instances of discrimination and supporting affected students. Could you elaborate on what this would entail?
Sure. So I think, as has been mentioned by my fellow candidates, the lack of a consistent harassment policy is one of the biggest issues. So one of the ways in which I would preventatively hold colleges to account is to lobby them to adopt that harassment policy and make the university policy the standard, rather than allowing the individual colleges to make up their own procedures in the first place. And I think that would prevent a lot of issues. And then the second thing that I would do is I would ensure that the students who are affected feel like they can come to me and approach me if they have been a victim of discrimination. So I would hold, Zoom calls. My email would always be open to anybody who wanted to do that, or they could contact me through one of their welfare reps. And I would then advocate for them in any meetings or any email exchanges that needed to happen, and stay in communication with the colleges and make sure that they were receiving support either through the college welfare team, through the university counselling service, or whatever it may be. And I would make sure that they got the support that they needed in those specific instances.
Thank you, Sophie. Yeah. Right, so we've reached the end of our questions and we've reached the end of Hustings. Please make sure that you vote. Voting opens tomorrow at 8 a.m. and it closes at 6 p.m. on Thursday, the 11th of Feb. The link is Oxford SU/leadership election. And you can find it through a quick Google search as well. I would like to thank all the candidates for participating and for their cooperation. And I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.